Firstly, there is obvious inability of Pakistani armed forces to protect its nuclear weapons facilities or nuclear facilities in general from Indian attacks. This is of particular importance because Pakistani generals have defined a number of red lines, a number of scenarios in which they would deploy nuclear weapons in the case, for example, India withdrawing from the Indus Water Treaty, in the case of Indian armed forces advancing deep into Pakistan, or in the case of India destabilizing Pakistan politically or blockading Karachi, for example, port of Karachi, and those badly damaging Pakistani economy. And then it turns out now that Pakistan is not sticking to its own red lines because India has crossed at least two of these and nothing happened. Indian armed forces have damaged the Pakistani armed forces so badly that these cannot protect their own nuclear facilities. Even more so that they cannot be sure that they might manage to pull out some of their stored nuclear warheads, bring them to their bases, install them on aircraft or on ballistic missiles. Indeed, India found itself in a position to strike absolutely with absolute safety selected targets inside Pakistan, no matter how far away from Indian border. And this meant that Pakistani armed forces were unable to protect the country even from such attacks. So the situation was threatening to become even ever more problematic for Pakistan. That is why they have requested ceasefire. India has not accepted a ceasefire, but said it is going to stop its operation. But it is constantly, since 10th of May, it's constantly carefully monitoring situation inside Pakistan, especially any kind of major movements at nuclear facility. Generally, the Pakistani nuclear command system was assessed as comparable to that of any other nuclear powers, which means that there are some 20 different points from the famous red button and the actual person who is then launching the weapon or installing it on an aircraft or on a ballistic missile and then firing it. But as I said, it was also so that before this war, Pakistani integrated air defense system was assessed as very strong, and Pakistani Air Force was assessed as very strong, and Pakistani armed forces in general were assessed as very strong. And now it turns out no, they have been dismantled in a matter of 90 hours. Therefore, actually, we need to completely reassess this Pakistani nuclear command system. We have to check who is really in command at what level, and this is something that is probably going to busy me as well as even more other people over the next days and weeks, because we have to find out who is really in control of what and who has the final say over what. Because it appears presently the Prime Minister of Pakistan is actually little else but somebody who is climbing on some tank and declaring victory, although it is obvious there is absolutely nothing to talk about victory, in at least not in Pakistan. It is, I think one of Indian generals has assessed this, is calling it a surgical war, not a surgical strike, but surgical war. Why? Because the commanders of the Indian armed forces did not go after widely shooting lots of missiles and UAVs into Pakistan randomly and trying to hit anything, like Pakistan tried to hit anything in India. No, they have focused their attention on striking very few, actually, very precisely selected objects on very carefully selected military facilities. It means, for example, on an air base where theoretically you could target 50 different spots, they have sought to target just 3 or 2 spots around the base. And this 3 or 4 spots or points, they're enough to shut down that airbase, because if you hit the middle of the runway, if you hit if you hit a hangar or the local command center, you are knocking out the entire base. So this is what they were targeting, and this is what they have hit. And that not in one case, not in just few cases, but 11 or 12 cases, or even 13. Look, now precisely how do they respond to this? I don't know enough to explain that, but it is obvious that they are ignoring Pakistan's systematic involvement in international jihadism, which is dating back some 60 years, back to the mid-1960s. They are ignoring it simply. And we have seen now IMF saving Pakistan in the middle of the war, although knowing Islamabad is out of condition to pay back, to serve its debt. So what kind of commercial interest or political interest is behind this? This is not really transparent for me, but they have decided to grant this loan to Islamabad. And now this is done. Why are they doing this? I don't understand this precisely, because they are threatened by the same jihadism from Pakistan as much as all of India or you and me. So why would you pay Pakistan or give a loan to Pakistan, although you know it is threatening you? No, you wouldn't. Would I do that? No, I wouldn't. So why is the IMF doing that? I don't know. Well, that depends. You know, if there would be if this conflict would be continued, if New Delhi would feel provoked by Pakistani behavior, whatever action, to continue this operation, it would restrike the Pakistani air defense system, whatever was left of the same. Then it would seek to destroy whatever is left of the Pakistani Air Force, or debilitate it to the level where it is no factor anymore. While right now Pakistani Air Force is still there, at least some 80% of it. And then it would start striking Pakistani ground forces along the border, along the line of control in Kashmir. And at that point in time, Pakistan would be really in trouble, because there would be a question for how long could these ground forces survive being pummeled and pounded day after day by dozens, perhaps hundreds and more of Indian bombs, missiles, rockets, and so on. So beyond that, it is very hard to predict, but that is most likely flow of developments in the case fighting restarts. But if you ask for further in the future, that is hard to predict. But I assess that Pakistan, because it is bankrupt, because it lacks the money for even more sophisticated weaponry, and unless Qatar agrees to finance a rearmament, the purchase of replacement armament from China, for example, and Turkey, that Pakistan is going to go, I call this the Russian way, which means trying to find ways to make cheap weapons that have a major impact. Earlier times, that would be 80s and 90s, but back then there used to be, which is actually the same in almost every armed force wherever you go, but there used to be strong groups within, for example, the army. People are favoring one general, and this general is at odds with some other general, or even two generals against three generals. And you have such groups in all teams, because every armed force is a big team, first and foremost, theoretically. Whether this is actually so in practice is a different story. So there's always a question, who is in charge right now, who is stronger, which of such groups is stronger. And then in Pakistani armed forces, you generally have a, so to say, group of officers or groups of officers who are less religious, less fanatical, but more patriotic. After all the years, now in the year 2025, India has developed this integrated air defense system, which is highly functional, and what is particularly, very, very unusual, is that this integrated air defense system of the Indian Air Force is incorporating the army, which means ground forces, which means that ground forces are as well informed about the radar picture, so to say, on what is flying around, as the Air Force is. This is something not even the Americans have managed so far. When you talk with their US Army officers, they are still talking about integrating their own air defense system, and then talking about integrating this with the system of their Air Force. So India has managed something unique, and that with its own, from its own powers.